Hey, what's up guys? It's Don Quixote and we are on LAX airport about to shoot a nice fashion shoot with our model Julia. And as you can see, there's an airplane coming down right now. Yeah, pretty cool, so let's shoot.
Here's one of the pictures, and although it's a nice shot, it's not very fashion-like at all. We shot directly in front of the runway, which is actually private property and located next to a police department. Since we didn't have a permit, we had to be fast and lie low. No strobes, no reflectors, only sunlight. However, after 20 minutes, a police officer stopped the shooting, so I'm glad we have a picture anyway, and now we can add something fashion-like in Photoshop. You need to have Photoshop CS6 extended to follow the tutorial, so make sure you have the 3D panel, which can be found under Window 3D. Before we start to create the actual fabric, let me introduce the 3D tool since it might be complicated in the beginning. I want to add a suitcase into our composition, and let's create the shape with the rounded rectangle tool. Brown color, 20 pixel radius, just a simple shape like this. Next, we want to convert our layer into a 3D object. And there are a few ways how we can convert them, like a postcard or a volume, but we want to use a 3D extrusion and press the Create button. Photoshop now switched into a 3D workspace and allows me to view my 3D object from every side. I now have to match the current view with the view of my image, and the most important parameter is the field of view. So what I do, I go to File Info, Camera Data, and I check the focal length. And then I reset the field of view with my 24mm lens. Now I can try to match the 3D grid with the ground of my image. And I'm guided by the diagonal barrier in the background, trying to match the red line with the bottom of the barrier. Once the red line is set, I can match the blue line with the other barrier. Which is a lot of guessing actually, so I try to be guided by the lines. And I think the view we have right now does make sense, so I'm gonna stick with this. And now I select my suitcase in the 3D panel, so I can move it in my 3D space. And obviously, this is a really huge suitcase, a little too big for our model Julia, so I'm gonna scale it down and reposition it. Still huge though, but you should see her actual suitcase. With our 3D model selected, we have some options in our property window, such as the depth of the extrusion, or some interesting deform options. But we also have a couple of presets, so I'm gonna select this one to really inflate the suitcase. And under my cap menu, I can define how strong my suitcase will be inflated. Let's say we're fine with the shape, so we can continue with adjusting the light. Here I can define the direction of my infinite light. So we now try to match the light sources, and the shadow is always a good orientation. Click on the icon to render the suitcase. Okay, position and light is fine, but we still have to make some adjustments. So click on the environment, and you see a couple of more options there. One of the things is the reflections, so let's set the color to one of the highlights in the image. And we also should increase the opacity of the shadow, as sunlight really does have the strong shadows. Then under my suitcase folder, I find a couple of materials for the front, for the back, for the extrusion, and each of them can be defined separately with a texture and attributes like shine, reflection, roughness. But for now, I select all the materials and apply a predefined brown leather preset. Let's render it, and it might take a while if you have a slow computer. Okay, much better. Let's duplicate the layer and create another suitcase by dragging one of the 3D objects behind the other. So as you can see, it's pretty simple to add objects once the current view and the light is set up. Let's have a quick render on this one too. And here we go. Okay, let's put the suitcases into a group and hide the group for now. It's time to create the fabric, but first let's separate Julia from the background. And I'm simply using the magic wand tool since our background, the sky, the barrier, the floor is pretty clear. And then press Command J on a Mac to duplicate the selection. With the background layer selected, create a fabric shape with the pen tool, maybe something that looks like a clock, but you really want to have the waves in there, and a rounded finish. But the shape is really essential for the look of the fabric later, so it might take you a couple of tries to actually get there where you want to be. Once you're done, create a 3D extrusion, and to save time, we can simply adopt the view of our suitcase. So it was actually a good idea to start with the suitcase. And now we want to select the fabric and bring it to its legitimate position. To get the right Z position, just simply watch the shadow. And this doesn't look like a fabric at all, but we take care of it now. Go to the deform menu in your properties and set the extrusion to 0, so it looks like a sheet of paper. Then navigate to cap and start inflating the shape. See how it starts to look as someone would really blow in the fabric from behind. If I now increase the strength even more, it starts to curl, which looks pretty cool and is exactly what we need. So what I'm doing now, I'm trying to find a good position for the fabric. So I'm rotating it on all 3 axes to get an idea how it looks like and in which position the 3D object looks best in our 2D composition. One more thing we can add in the cap menu to make our 3D object look more like a fabric is a bevel with the second contour and the width of 1%. Now the outline really looks like a seam. And I continue experimenting with the right position for the fabric. And it's really hard to determine the final position since you have always in your mind maybe there is something that looks even better. So it can take you hours to find something that satisfies you. I think I'm still trying to adjust this one here. I mean, look how many possibilities there are. It's really hard to say that's it, but I think that's it. Now we have to adjust the light, move it around, try to match the original light, maybe increase the intensity. And I'm not paying attention to the shadow since I can fix that later easily. Okay, that looks good so far. So now we can adjust the texture of our material. And let's start with a preset, the cotton one, which adds a structure to our material. Responsible for that is a bump map, and I can increase the depth by dragging the bump slider. I want to leave it very subtle by 5%, and I can adjust the structure by edit UV properties and make it barely visible by increasing the U and V scale, so it actually looks like small fibers. Okay, next we need to adjust the color of the fabric. And I can do it by double-clicking on the diffuse color and just pick a color from the original fabric. Then we can add about 60% shine, about 50% reflection, a little bit of roughness, maybe 3 or 4%. And as our fabric should be sheer, I'm gonna set the opacity to about 75%. And once you're done with your material, you can save it by pressing on new material, and I just name it Julia's fabric. Then select of all my material layers and apply the fabric we just created. Okay, so we're all set up and I can render my fabric. Photoshop is not a 3D software yet, so it'll take you quite a while to render the whole fabric. And once it's rendered and you're pleased, make sure to rasterize the 3D layer. Now our fabric is not a 3D object anymore, but a flat layer that can be edited as usual. So what I want to do is I want to liquefy the fabric and adjust its shape so it's not in front of the rear section of the airplane. And I'm using the push left tool since it's the most appropriate for this purpose. Switching the backdrop on and off to get an idea where the plane actually is. Some more adjustments down here. Okay. And as you can see, it's still in front of the airplane. So back in our Liquify plugin, I set the backdrop to the background only. And now I really see how it looks like. Okay, so next we want to adjust the color and attach it more to the original fabric. And I press Command G to put the fabric into a new folder. And I add a gradient map adjustment layer and clip it with the fabric layer. Go to your properties window and double click on the gradient to adjust the colors. So I want to have the red color in the midtones and a dark red for the blacks and shadows. And I actually need to match the red with the original fabric. So let's pick one of the colors and drag it more to the right. Okay. And add a levels adjustment layer and clip it with the fabric as well. Then increase the highlights and the midtones. And here's a trick. The fabric still looks too plain, so double click on the fabric layer to open layer styles and activate pattern overlay. Select one of the two gray presets, increase the scale to 1000%, set the blend mode to soft light, and set the opacity down to about 20%, and see how the surface gets some subtle irregularities. Pretty simple but very effective. While I have my fabric selected, let's adjust the shadow by transforming it, stretching it. And obviously we missed a spot on Julia's heels. So let me just quickly adjust this with a eraser. Very quick, very dirty. Here we go. Then select the whole shadow with the marquee tool and go to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur, and set the distance to about maybe 50 pixels. And I know it doesn't look real at all, but I can live with that and focus on the fabric. Add an empty layer above the adjustment layers and clip it with the fabric. Select a small hard brush and pick a color of the highlight and start to repaint some of the edges on the fabric to copy the light behavior of the original fabric. Then apply Julia's layer mask and create a copy, name it Shadow, and clip it with the fabric. Rotate and reposition Julia's arm to imitate a shadow, then double-click on a layer to enter layer styles, activate color overlay, and set the color to a dark red, and press OK. Change the opacity to about 85%, then go to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur, and set the distance very low to about 5 pixels. Select the front part of the shadow with a lasso and shift it a little bit to the left side. Then drag the layer below the lines layer and maybe decrease the opacity even more. A little more fixing on the rough selection we made on Julia. And finally create a copy of our fabric below the original. Clear the layer style and decrease the opacity so the fabric looks more solid and not as sheer as it is. And I think we're done, guys. I hope you enjoyed our little 3D tutorial. You can add the suitcases if you want to, or try to build your own 3D elements. Feel free to use the image for training purpose and post your results to our Facebook website. My name's Dom Quichotte. Take care.